Evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. And I'm hoping that you can all see us. I'm delighted to be joined by Jody Cooksley, who's talking to us this evening about her book, which I'm just about to pick up. I'm trying to go live on Facebook at the same time. So The Small Museum, which is out now. And hi, Jody. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Would you like to tell us about The Small Museum?
So the Small Museum is it's a gothic. It's a Victorian gothic. It's set among fossil hunters and medics in Victorian London and Charmouth in Dorset. It's really an exploration of what happens when that fascination to collect and sort and label the natural world might be driven by ambition towards some quite dark ends, and it's a bit of a character study in the lengths that people will go to make a name for themselves, to save their families' names. It has a lot of the classic tropes of Gothic fiction. So it's set in a big old creepy house with creepy servants. It's got some very dark characters in it, but it's also a crime novel, because by the second chapter, the reader knows that a crime has been committed. They're not too sure which of the narrators is reliable, and so in between two different narratives, you see a trial unfolding at an assizes, and then you get the rest of the backstory as well.
Yeah, I really like the two sort of threads of the story together. And I reviewed the book last week, and I didn't give away too much because it's really difficult to not give away too much about this book because it's really intricately plotted and there's a lot going on, and the characters are so gripping, and some of them are awful. Actually, quite a lot of them are.
Yeah, they were quite fun to write.
Quite a lot of them are awful. So you have Maddie, Madeline, who's married off to Dr. Lucius Everley, sort of a renowned doctor in his field of, and his sister Grace, who's another lovely character.
I had a lot of fun with Grace.
Yeah, what was the sort of inspiration between, but before sort of, for Maddie and Lucius, I guess, to start with, and did they come quite easily, or was that something that came later on?
It was always going to be a story about Maddie. Maddie actually, she really changed for me. I'd imagined her in one way, and actually by the end of the novel, she had become a lot more strong than I'd ever really imagined her from the outset. So really sort of turning that gothic thing on its head a little bit. Grace came to me when I started to write the initial scene about their wedding, and I thought, just imagine what would happen if there was a really compelling kind of figure there, and it just sort of tumbled from there. Really, it is a story about a particularly powerful and wealthy family, and a family that thinks it's untouchable. In that way, it was quite fun to have both Lucius and Grace together as sort of these, evil siblings, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, they were, because I think I felt sorry for her because she's sort of married off, isn't she, to save her family. Her sister sort of brought the family into disrepute, and they sort of, her father marries her off to this rich doctor to save the family from ruin, really. And her stories are really incredible. It's really difficult to not sort of give her story, but she's very naive, isn't she? She's very innocent and doesn't really know anything about marriage, and then she marries this man who has got so many secrets and isn't very warm to her when they first get married. In fact, he goes out, doesn't he?
Yeah, he immediately goes out, and it's very clear from the outset that his work with the societies, and all the things that he does to sort of create this name for himself are far more important to him than anybody else in his life, but certainly not his wife.
Yeah, no, as I said, you said he's a real piece of work, and can you tell us a bit more about his sort of his occupation, I guess? So his sort of, well, it's not even an occupation, it's more of an obsession, isn't it?
So he is the son of a quite a well-known high-profile doctor who died in a bit of disgrace after some dodgy dealings in the medical profession, and so he is a doctor. He's a slightly different doctor than his father. Not a surgeon, but a generalist. But he has carried on his father's work in this small museum, which is a collection of taxidermy and artifacts and medical curiosities. And in this instance, I mean, a lot of Victorians had these things in their homes. They had these sort of cabinets of curiosity that they used to display things from the natural world in, to show them off and to show their knowledge off. But his small museum is kept under lock and key, and Maddie becomes quite keen to see what might be inside there, kept away from ordinary eyes.
Yeah, and so the story, quite early on in the story, she goes to the house, and the house is very, you must have had a lot of fun with the house. I thought the house was really great. That it's really dark. Like I said in the beginning, it's dark, it's Victorian, there's sort of noises. You've got the awful housekeeper, Mrs. Barker, who sort of plots around, and it was based, we talked about it at the beginning, so the book was based on the I couldn't say it before, could I? Hunterian Museum
Museum,
in London.
Yeah, it's the chapter titles. So I sort of knew I was composting the ideas for this book already, and I've wanted for a long time to write a book about that period of cultural history, if you like, the sort of the fear that Victorians had of evolutionary science and what that meant for them, and their belief and their sense of self and their sense of what it means to be human. And I was toying around with these ideas when I had this visit to the Hunterian Museum, and it's an extraordinary place. It's part of the Royal College of Surgeons, and it is absolutely stuffed with really weird and wonderful things in jars. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to base the chapter titles on this and make it as though they're all exhibits in a small museum. And then I sort of cursed myself halfway through the book for doing that, because, of course, you need those to then be relevant. So everything that's in the chapter titles has a bit of an Easter egg. So you have to kind of you have to find that thing within the chapter itself. It's all written about and part of the story.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really good. Was that sort of, you said you cursed it, was it sort of difficult to, I guess that's the sort of thing, isn't it, about mixing fact and fiction together, that sometimes it can sort of steer you in a different direction, maybe not one that you wanted to go in, or maybe sort of restrict you. Did you find that at all?
No, I didn't find that it restricted me, but there was some of the more fascinating exhibits that I really, really wanted to get in there. Sometimes it was actually quite hard to create something which didn't seem a little bit too convenient where that object might appear in the text.
Yeah, no, I sort of, the house, I mean, quite early on, Annie, one of the maids, she is terrified by something in the house, isn't she? And she sort of, we find out later that she's sort of been taken away to, the asylum, and as these hysterical women were back in that day.
It was quite convenient. They were quite full, these asylums, full of.
They must have been absolutely
not bad at all.
Because when you look at the you find lists, don't you, of things that women were put in asylums for, and I mean, was book reading, and having a period, and all these things that that women have every day. And I say it was quite convenient for the husbands to dump them off in the asylum when they'd had enough of them.
Absolutely, we'd all be in there. Everybody in a crime book club is going to be in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And actually, when you think about it, it's scary, because it's not that long ago that was still happening. Really. As the book progresses, and Maddie is desperate, isn't she? She's desperate to want to make her husband like her, to show interest in her, and she finds a way of sort of getting into his world a bit with the drawing.
Yeah.
And how did that sort of come about? Because I sort of thought that was quite a clever way to sort of, because I was thinking, you know, he's just not interested in her at all, but she manages to get him to be interested in her by being interested in his collection and also offering to draw them against the will of her mother, who thinks it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, well, her mother thinks everything was a terrible idea. Just anything that she did that wasn't just walking around with a book on her head or playing the piano, which was again quite typical of those sorts of families at that time. I think I wanted to show Maddie's character from the outset as being a little bit more than just a damsel who's been married off. And for me, it was quite important to sort of look at her backstory amongst her brothers and her sort of railing against not really having a proper education and going, you know, doing drawing the natural world and so on. And so she was quite a tomboy really before she got married off. And so it did dovetail quite nicely with that plot because, of course, the more I started to research evolutionary theory at that time, the more I realized that you know, I think there's a scene in the book as well that sort of explores this. If you find a dinosaur bone or you find the tooth of a mammoth, somebody has to imagine what that looked like. So somebody, an artist, or you know, somebody has to imagine what that creature would have looked like, and it's not going to be a doctor. It's not going to be a fossil hunter. It's going to be an artist. And so for me, that was quite an interesting part of the story because that's the point at which she becomes not so innocent because she's working with him. She's almost colluding on because she wants to discover this creature as well.
And when her mum and sister come to visit, and they're sort of horrified, aren't they, by the fact that she's, you know, going against, like you said, you know, sitting doing her sewing or reading, you know, that sort of. But she sort of sees it as something that she needs to do to be able to get close to her husband, and also to find out more about what he does, because he's, like you say, he's always going off. He goes off to his club and his society, and you know, that's it must have been. I mean, I've really felt for her as the book went on, because she's sort of taken away from everything she knows, her country sort of life, isn't it? I think there's one bit where I found it really interesting was when she said she hadn't been outside for ages, and she's so used to being in that sort of country rural setting, and then she's taken to a town which is not seen to be the proper thing to go out walking without your husband or you know, chaperone. And it just felt very claustrophobic. Was that when you were writing it? Did you sort of feel that claustrophobia of the book and the situation and everything?
I did, and it was, as I say, I was thinking about the book for a long time and thinking about, you know, playing around with the themes for a long time before I started writing and even developing any characters. And as I was writing it, I dreamed about it a lot.
Wow.
I'm quite an insomniac anyway. I don't sleep too much. I work full time in a day job, and I write in the middle of the night. And I was writing this book on my own in this writing room in the middle of the night. So often when I went to bed, I was then dreaming, and sort of, and some of those dreams became very emotive. And there was always this sort of sense of being trapped, that claustrophobia, because she was a very young girl, very young to be married. She just wanted attention and approval, I think, from anyone. So she had a difficult life with her family. They changed when her sister sort of sullied their reputation. She wasn't a boy, so she didn't get that kind of attention. So I think by the time she ended up in that house, she knew that Lucius was probably the only person she was going to have any kind of intellectual companionship with. And I think that's why she went on to push to do the things that she did, because she just wanted some company.
Because Grace, she sort of thinks that Grace is going to be a companion, doesn't she, to start with? But she soon doesn't. Well, I mean, she's not very warm. She's not someone that you would warm to, and she's got a really problematic relationship with her own children. and her husband's away all the time in India, isn't it? And so she sort of spends quite a lot of her time in the house, but also with her sort of philanthropic activities that she does, saving fallen women. And as the book sort of develops, obviously find more out about her and that. But out of the characters that you wrote, which ones were the most enjoyable? Because quite often it can be the nasty ones that are more enjoyable to write than and which ones were the most which ones were the most difficult to write?
I think Lucius was probably the most difficult to write, actually, because in order to make him successful as a character, he had to come across at arm's length in the book, which meant he was sort of at arm's length from me as well while I was writing him, if that makes sense. So I think he was probably the most difficult character to write. By far the easiest was Grace. Yeah. She was joyfully evil. Joyfully evil. In fact, she was such a treat to write that she features quite heavily in the sequel.
Is there a sequel? I was going to ask you about that later.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. So yes, and actually that's just finished, and that's just gone off to the publisher. So they did buy both books. It was a 2-book deal, and I've just finished writing the sequel.
Oh, that's very exciting. After just finishing the first one,
it won't be out for another year. It'll come out next summer.
Because I think did you always know that was going to be, did you always know that it was a 2-book story when you started writing, or did that sort of, again, did that progress as you?
I think I really missed the characters as soon as I finished writing them.
Yeah.
I really missed, and I felt like there was more. I haven't felt that with previous things that I've written, but this time I definitely felt like there was more to be told. But it is just one more book. Yeah.
Because the book is, I hope you don't mind me saying it's dark. It is dark. It's macabre, dark, and it's got some bits that are really quite emotional and emotive. And was that difficult? With that sort of claustrophobia of the house and what Maddie goes through. You said about dreaming. I imagine you must have had some really horrible dreams if that was.
Yes, I did, but I think actually sometimes if you want to write quite a meaningful and emotional story about, and at the end of the day, it is it is a story about female friendship. It is a story of survival and female friendship, and it's and things that are overcome, so life is kind of like that, isn't it? It can be fierce, it can be brutal. I think women today, they face a lot of pretty similar things to what Victorian women were facing. So for me, those two things did go a little bit hand in hand.
It's a shame, isn't it, that you think 100 years plus on, that women are still facing similar issues. Some of them have moved on. We're not put in asylums anymore, but there's still quite a lot of things that we would hope that would have moved on a little bit quicker than they have. Sorry.
No, I wasn't.
Sorry. Yeah. So how did you sort of plot the book? Did you always know how it would end? Was it something? Did you have like a sort of idea about Maddie to start with, and then sort of that progressed, or? And are you a plotter or a pantser?
Yeah, I think everyone's a little bit of both. I'd be really quite nervous of anyone who said that they were just a pantser, because that is. And by the same token, I think if you know exactly the plot of your novel and your characters don't at some point change your mind on the way through, then that's probably not a very engaging novel. As you're writing through,
isn't it? Yeah.
To have a sort of story arc, and of course you do need a well-paced story arc. You need to know what's going to happen in your plot, and you need to pace that. But actually, the way that I tend to write is I'll plot action by chapter. I will write it one chapter at a time in the first draft. and then I will rewrite the plot every time I finish a chapter,
Yeah.
because it changed, because some things change. You might have a different scene in your head. Sometimes your characters interact with one another in a way that you absolutely didn't expect. There are some, without giving any sort of plot spoilers, there are some character interactions in there that I really was not expecting at all, and it was quite a surprise to sort of sit back and think, oh no, actually I'll develop that a little bit more.
I really like that sort of people talk about that, don't they, about how the characters, you have that idea in your head of what you think your character's going to be like, but I like the fact that through the process of writing that becomes more, they become different, or because I guess things happen to them, and like life where happens, and then you just manage to, they sort of think, well, I don't want to do that, I want to go here instead. Or obviously,
And you get to know them as well, so it's almost like the process of getting to know a new friend. When you
yeah,
first start writing a character, you might know one thing about them, but actually once you've put them through a few things and you see how they respond to those things and how they react to different situations, you know them a bit better.
yeah.
So they, you do, you kind of miss them when you stop writing about them, which sounds really strange. I need to stop writing in the middle of the night. These are my friends.
Well, I mean, I'm in all the fact that you write, you work full time and you write as well. I mean, that's quite quite a thing to do, and takes a lot of commitment. And is you with your day job, is that anything to do with writing as well? Is it?
Yeah, so I started out life as a journalist, and I think a lot of writers do actually, because when you're writing for a living, you're practicing that art of writing all the time, and you just kind of, you get better at it if you're doing that
Yeah.
every day for a job. So I've done journalism and PR, and I'm still working in communications. So a lot of my job does involve writing.
Yeah, because I think it's when you've got that sort of, I guess, like you said, it's people say it's like a muscle, isn't it? If you don't use it, and writers are generally readers. And I was interested in the sort of research of your book, and sort of how much of the book, how long did it take you to research, and are you a jump down a rabbit hole sort of researcher?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm really, I mean, the Victorian period is my happy place. I'm already really quite obsessed with the Victorian period. I've loved its literature, its novels and its poetry. I've done a master's in Victorian poetry. So all of those sort of themes and contexts, the way that it does come very naturally to me to write
Yeah.
in that sort of period. For this particular book, I had to do a lot of research on the medical theory, and the evolutionary theory, all of those seminal texts, because it was, although it's not a factual book, it is set in 1873, so it's really important that you get all of that context right. That
Yeah.
they couldn't have known any more than was actually known about these
Yeah.
things at that time. So that probably was a bit of a rabbit hole, I think, because there are other texts than Darwin's, so
Yeah.
I needed to do a bit of reading around those, and then visiting the museums. I visited quite a lot of Victorian houses just to get that sort of scene. So bits of Lucius Everly's house are actually sort of loosely based on Dickens' house in London, the Dickens House
Yeah.
Museum. Particularly the stairs and the garden. So that's really nice research. Really, it's not all
Yeah.
desperate. It's a lot of it's
No.
location based, and obviously going to Charmouth and seeing what Charmouth is like. So and actually, Charmouth is very little changed from how it was in the Victorian period. So that was really nice to kind of do that location research as well.
And that sort of really helps you sort of setting the scene, if you can sort of go back to that place, to Charmouth or to the houses, so that you've got that picture. I think that
Yeah.
makes it really interesting for the reader then, that you can sort of get transported to that place, isn't it? Because you need to have that picture in your head. I do. I need to have a picture in my head when I'm reading.
Yeah.
And this one, I mean, the house is very unsettling for a lot of reasons. it's definitely not one I'd want to stay overnight in.
Oh, but you would. You would. There's a when I come from Norwich, which is a really lovely town, very old.
Yeah.
There's a really amazing museum in Norwich called Strangers Hall. I don't know if you've heard of it
No,
or visited.
I haven't.
It's one of the oldest homes that's still sort of open to the public. I think it's from about 12 or 1300. And when I was a small child, I used to beg to be taken there. And it was my absolute dream to be allowed to stay there overnight.
Really?
I was convinced that there was all sorts of people sort of holed up in the walls and lots of ghosts and things there. I'm pretty glad they didn't allow me to do that because I was probably terrified. But I really remember that very clearly.
So from an early age, you've like been fascinated with the dark and the macabre.
Yeah, I think I probably have. Yeah. I can remember my mother showing me the sorts of stories that I used to write at school, and used to get reasonably good marks for them, and then the teachers would sort of back away. They're quite creepy stories.
I think I really like it. I love a gothic sort of thriller. It's sort of just something that is unsettling. I think a book that can unsettle you is really powerful because I remember I used to read a lot of horror, and I had to stop reading it because when I was pregnant with my eldest, I got really bad dreams from reading horror, so I stopped reading it. But I've come back to it recently. But I've never got that sort of people say, "Oh, I can't read that before I go to bed." Whereas I've never really had that with a book, but a television program I can get really unnerved by, but books don't seem to do that to me.
I do get very unnerved by books, and I can remember I read a book called Uncle Silas by Sheridan Le Fanu when I was about 17, and the same age as the protagonist in this book, who's called Maud, and it was really creepy book. Absolutely loved it. It stayed with me for such a long time after I'd finished reading it, and I guess ever since then I've really wanted to write books that unsettle people, that sort of affect you and stay with you after the lights go out.
No, I think it's that sort of it's the not knowing, isn't it? What is that noise, or what is that bump, or it's that sort of what is that? And I think there's a lot of that is when Maddie doesn't know what's happening in the house. There's things that she hears, and she gets put down as an hysterical woman, but as when you read the book, you'll find out there's much more to it than that. I was interested in the relationship. So we touched on the relationship between Maddie and Lucius, and sort of her sort of longing to be, I think loved is quite a strong word with him, because I don't think she really ever mentions, does she, being loved by him. She just wants him to be nice to her. And for her to be a good wife and him to be a reasonable husband. I don't even think she doesn't put much pressure on him at all, does she? But what do you think his relationship with her is? Do you think he just marries her because of what he wants out of the relationship? Because he could have just stayed unmarried. He didn't need to be married to her. I just was quite interested in that dynamic of what made him sort of give in to a man to give this young girl, a chance away from her family, because
I think for me there's a sense that he, because of the transaction that he made with her family, she was quite disposable. And so it without giving any spoilers away, he thought it was going to be much easier for him to be able to achieve what he wanted to achieve at the end of the book without any sort of comeback, because she was kind of meaningless and sort of collateral, if you like.
So it was really a business transaction for him, with no sort of,
and Grace, for him and Grace.
That's even more brutal. I mean, he does come over as awful, but you don't know, I always try to see the best in people, and unfortunately I didn't find any in him.
No, there isn't, because he's very weak as well. He's a very weak man, sort of enthralled to his sister as well.
Well, and he's got that sort of family thing, hasn't he, where he sort of living in the shadow of his father, who was, a great physician, but also disgraced and not. And then Caroline comes along, who's Maddie's friend, and she's from a family that, well, Grace doesn't like. She doesn't want her in the house at all, does she? She's sort of, there's been history with them, we'll say. But actually, I thought Maddie sort of surprised me with that, because she's actually, well, no, actually, I'm going to have a friend, and I'm going to carry on seeing this woman, which is just as well, really. So for her friendship, and that she's got someone who is on her side, because she doesn't really have anybody before then, does she?
No, that's right. And she tries even to have friendships with the servants, and of course they're too terrified to do that. I think that was at the point at which, when she meets Caroline, I wasn't too sure what was going to happen with that particular relationship, but actually she treated her like a lifeline, and I think it was she absolutely threw herself at that friendship, Maddie, because I think she recognized that if she didn't, then there was going to be nowhere else for her to go. That it was, that she needed to have someone, and this was her only chance really to do that.
Because she sort of is. So Rebecca is Maddie's sister, who basically, we know that she sort of shamed the family, and we don't know much more about it, but it obviously affected Maddie quite deeply. And I think I wondered whether there's something to do with that as well, that she was her older sister, and whether sort of Caroline almost becomes that sort of sister figure for that she's always wanted, from a fact, because her family, we say this, her family haven't really got a lot of time for her, have they? Which is sad.
No. And I think I get a sense of her being quite sort of hurt and alone, and just in real need of that sort of female friendship and solidarity. And I think her longing for a friend actually ends up making her brave. In a way that we weren't quite expecting.
No, she surprised me. I like that. Did she surprise you when you were wanting her? Because I think that's sort of quite apparent, I think, because I think if you're surprised, if the reader's surprised, often it's because the author is surprised of the strength and the resilience that she has, because she could have just done what they wanted her to do, which is curl up and end up wherever she ends up. Nobody really cared about her. So I was pleased. I was flying the flag for Maddie. I wanted her to succeed, and I think she's in some ways her naivety, but she's not, she does know, doesn't she? So when she does the drawings and things, she knows she's sort of using her power in a way, but just something that she's got, that she thinks, right, this is what I can attract him with.
And I think it's less sort of attracting him, as more just wanting to just prove herself, and just to have somebody to see what you can feel this sort of power rising up in her, I suppose, if you like. In many ways it's a bit of a coming of age story, I suppose. She does very much discover herself at that age in her life. It's all that sort of power that you can feel sort of rising up inside yourself, that you just want people to see. She wanted people to notice her, and I think she always felt she was more than she was given credit for.
I think I was really surprised with how I really liked that. So I liked, there's bits of her story that are really awful, and you sort of want that, you're sort of willing that her life to get better, but as the time it is, you're wondering whether actually it will. I'm not going to give any spoilers on that one, so you have to read it if you haven't read it. But did the darkness in the book, without giving too much away about the darkness in the book, did that sort of come from the start? Did you know the sort of main theme of the story, and was that something that happened quite quickly in the process, that you knew where it would go?
I did know that was going to be the main theme, and it, as I said, it was real for me. It was a real sort of, it was an exploration in human depravity, I suppose, like the lengths that people will go to for things.
Yeah.
In that sense, it reminds me a little bit of Gothic books like Patrick Susskind's Perfume.
Yeah.
And actually, I will just reassure readers, it is nowhere near as bad as Patrick Susskind's
I haven't
Perfume.
actually read it. I've got it here
Oh,
somewhere.
you must. Oh, you must. It's absolutely one of my favourite books, and I'm really quite terrified of it still. I was doing
Really?
a series of chats to camera about different Gothic books that I like, and
Yeah.
I took it from the shelf, and and the cover almost gave me just a shiver, because the character in it, Bromwell, is quite honestly one of the most horrible characters I've ever encountered in fiction. He was an absolute master of creating that character. I've reread it again, and it has the same effect on me.
I mean, that's really powerful, isn't it? The fact that you can read
Mm,
a book, because sometimes you'll sort of think, oh, I wish I could read that book again from the beginning. But I think
mm,
if it's something, so Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books, and I can read that again and again and find something darker in
yeah,
it, and I think that's a really special book, isn't it? That you can do that you go back to.
yeah.
And
This one is just horrible. It's like you'll go back to it in a really macabre way. It's like sort of poking a tooth that you know is going to hurt.
but
But the picture of Dorian Gray as well. The same. This is in the same kind of way. Like that's
yeah.
really, it's about the sort of lengths that people will go to.
Yeah, yeah, no, I have read A Picture of Dorian Gray, and that again is you've got that sort of depravity and obsession and all the
Mm,
things that people will do to achieve what they want to do.
yeah.
So did you the sort of the sequel? Can we sort of touch on that a little bit more of sort of, I guess we can't give too much away if you haven't read the end of this one, but
Mm.
you know, is it sort of set sort of straight after, or a bit further on, or?
So it's set 8 years later. So it's eight years later, and without giving too much away, it's quite difficult. But what I can say is that I didn't want it to be just more retelling of the stories of the same characters.
Yeah.
So whilst it does lead on from the Small Museum, it takes some of the more minor characters in the Small Museum,
Mhm.
and it makes them into the major characters. So you'll see Dr. Threlfall
Oh
coming into quite a character in the sequel, and I enjoyed writing him immensely. He's this sort of foppish character who's one of the
yeah.
early mind meddlers, as they called them, these kind
Yeah.
of psychiatrists that were really just coming into their own at the time. And he's a really odd kind of conflicted character, because of course he's very young
Mm.
in the Small Museum, and he really comes into his own in the sequel.
That's interesting. I really like those characters that are quite unassuming, and you sort of think you don't really. So I mean, obviously you've got characters like Lucius, who is larger than life in his way, but those sort of unassuming ones that become, and they must be fun to write when you sort of dropped him in at the beginning as
Yeah.
what he does, what he's there for, and then to be able to sort of have that storyline progress for him must be quite exciting as a writer.
Yeah, very, very exciting. And it's almost like it's like being back with old friends. It's very and I wrote it far more quickly than I've ever written anything else, because I just wanted to know what was going to happen.
Yeah. Because this one, the Small Museum has won a prize. Is it the Caledonian?
Yeah, the Caledonian Novel Award,
Yeah.
26 last years.
So
Yeah,
that's really exciting. And was that how you sort of, because you've written books before, haven't you? But
yeah.
so how did that sort of happen with your sort of your journey with being published and
So I've published. So I wrote, my first novel was about the 19th century portrait photographer Julia Margaret Cameron.
yeah, I saw that.
she's an absolutely amazing woman, completely eccentric, and a brilliant figure to base a fictional account of her life on. And that was with Cinnamon Press. It was very, very, very small press imprint. Then the second book with them as well, which is a sort of dual narrative set between two wars, which is actually quite a personal family story. And then I think I've really discovered my genre with Gothic horror. These these books are the books that I've always wanted to write. And I entered the Small Museum and another contemporary Gothic fiction actually into the Caledonian Novel Award last year, and was delighted to win.
Fantastic.
Which secured me my agent, Charlotte Seymour from Johnson and Alcock, who was the judge that year. And it's just kind of propelled the writing to a completely new, another level.
So does that make it more difficult in a way to carry on your sort of day job? Are you anywhere sort of near being able to sort of make it a full-time job, or is it something that you want to carry on, doing your other job as well?
At the moment, I mean, at the moment, it's still fine and it's still manageable. I really love writing, and so it feels, and a lot of people say, "Oh, isn't it just work because you come home and then you come and you sit at a desk?" But actually, I don't watch a lot of TV. My children are older now, so I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old who's doing his GCSEs at the moment. So they need less of my time. And I really, I don't need much sleep. So I quite often start writing at 10 and we'll finish writing at 2 in the morning. And that is very relaxing to me. That's kind of what I do to relax, switch off.
I wish I didn't need that much sleep. I need to go to bed at like 9:30 and I'm still dragging myself out at 7.
I have the inevitable comparisons always with Margaret Thatcher. That's the first thing people always say.
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I would never say that to you. I mean, some people don't. I mean, actually, quite often there's this whole thing, isn't there, about the 5 o'clock club at the moment, the 5 a.m. club. I mean,
they're the worst.
Yeah.
They're the worst. Imagine getting up at that time of day.
No.
I'm a real night owl, and I think probably the worst piece of writing advice anyone has ever given me is to make sure that you get up before the rest of your family is up and put in the shift of writing. I was completely uncreative at that time of day. I felt miserable and cold.
Yeah. No, it's not for me. I like my sleep too much. I think there'd be too many distractions to want to, just have another couple of hours in bed. Particularly in the winter, I think, I think you have to be quite motivated. I don't think I'm motivated enough to do that.
No.
So you're working on, you've just finished book 2 of this one, and then have you got anything planned sort of after that?
Yeah, so I'm sort of halfway through, I suppose, another Victorian Gothic set amongst mudlarks, mudlark community, and then which it's Gothic crime again. So I really like the sort of creepy atmosphere building suspense of Gothic, but I like the plot-driven action of crime, and I really like the way that the two of them can sort of gel together. And so this one is another Gothic crime, and then I am sort of composting ideas for characters for a fourth another Victorian Gothic crime.
Exciting. I've just managed to get the comments up on my other.
Oh, brilliant.
So we've got Leslie and Caroline both saying hi, and Leslie says she gets up at 5 in the summer when it's light, but not in the winter. Well, I think you're great to do that anyway.
Well done. Yeah, well done. I'm in awe.
Yeah, I mean, I am awake. I do wake up earlier, but yeah, that's as far as it goes. Going back to the book, and I was just thinking about the sort of the relationships that men had then of, being able to sort of be believed that so without going into too much detail, but it was very the thing, wasn't it, that a man would be believed of what he would say about his wife, regardless of there was no sort of, was that quite, I mean, I guess, we sort of having to sort of read about that and what women sort of went through in that time must be quite difficult. It's quite difficult to read at times because it's so far removed from, well, from my life anyway. But I know some women, you know, probably do have that sort of, you know, a man having all that power. But yeah, it just seemed it was really hard to read at points, isn't it?
I think what's even harder to read is actually some of the testimonials that I did read as part of research for this book
Yeah.
and for the sequel, and actually for the third one that I'm writing as well. There is a lot of sort of collections of women's stories, testimonials. Some of them are true stories of, you know, fallen women
Yeah.
from the time, or women from historical records, from various different counties, and also the stories of women who did get put into asylums, because there was around the turn of the century, the late Victorian period, kind of turn of the century, there was quite a move towards asylum reform, and as part of that, people did go into these places, and they did do a lot of interviews and recorded a lot of interviews with a lot of the people who were in there. And some of them make for really quite emotive reading.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think that sort of, I guess that was the first time, you know, I guess that for research is very powerful because, you know, I imagine that some of it is so horrific and unbelievable that if you put it in a book, people wouldn't believe that that was a thing, but actually it was.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And there's a point. There is a point in the sequel where one of the characters begins to collect stories like that, and actually some of them are based on real sort of factual research.
Were the characters at all based on any sort of real people, or that nobody came up in your research that you sort of thought that you would base it on, but they're all sort of fictional?
Yeah, they're all fictional. There's a few in there that I use as you sort of throw in breadcrumbs, I think, sometimes when you're writing historical fiction. So there's, I think I mentioned at one point, the society portraitist George Frederick Watts, who of course is
Yeah.
real, and some of the fossil hunters, and some of the kind of well-known society men paleontologists. They're real figures, but they don't feature very heavily in the book.
I really like that thread of the story, the sort of the Charmouth thread, and when they go off to, I mean, I'm in Devon, so Dorset's not that far away, and sort of Lyme Regis and Mary Anning. I always sort of think about that with the and that sort of curio and that sort of fascination with that sort of the different, was a very Victorian thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, but Tracy Chevalier's book about Mary Anning is amazing. Is it called Remarkable
Yeah,
Creatures? Is
yeah.
that?
And I think there's
Yeah,
a film, isn't there,
it's
about
brilliant.
there's a film with it, which is amazing as
Yeah,
well.
the film is amazing, but it's not very much like the book.
Quite often the way, isn't
I
it?
mean, it's a really very it's really very different to the book, but it's good in a different way. But Mary Anning was an incredible character. What a rich seam of fiction to sort of mine, and I think that what I've always been really fascinated by is this sort of urge to be the first, to collect something, to find something, to have. And the Victorians did. I mean, they did create fakes. They did create the most awful things.
Yeah.
There's Piltdown Man. It is one of them, which is, you know, they were always trying to find these bits and pieces to make a missing link. And I think there's things that you can see that are, you know, they've got sheep's bones and monkey's jaws and these things. And
Sort of
I don't know how they
yeah,
would think that people
yeah.
wouldn't know what they
Well, it was
were.
like the Mer people, wasn't it? That sort of the Mer, you know, they're obsessed. I was thinking of the mermaid and Mrs. Hancock.
Oh yes, yeah.
And that's sort of, you know, all around this, you know, this fascinate well, it is obsession, isn't it, of like wanting to have this place or this. And I guess that's something that, you know, it was that sort of, you know, they were big buyers of art, and I guess that was another, you know, string to their sort of that the nouveau riche, you know, having that money that they wanted to buy, you know, art, or, you know, sort of curiosities or having something that was nobody else had. You know,
Mm.
it's quite,
I think it's because there was the industrialization made a whole new tranche of middle
yeah,
classes, and they were people of leisure who didn't quite know what to do with their leisure, who suddenly had money and wanted to show that they had money, and
yeah,
yeah, it's these kind of ostentatious displays of wealth. There's a brilliant museum in Brighton called the Booth Museum, which is I think at the top of the park around sort of on Dyke Road, and it is just one man's personal collection that he died without children, and he ended up just sort of giving it over to the local authorities to
yeah.
open as a museum, and it is a vast museum. It's just quite extraordinary that one person could have shot that amount of birds and kind of stuffed them and collected all of these animals and
Oh,
things like that. It
yeah.
was real eye-opener into Victorian ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, your research sounds amazing. I think I'd quite just like to do the research, not necessarily write the book, but just
Ah,
just go around and have a look at.
come with me on a research trip. I'll take you to dark and strange
Take
places.
notes. Well, we went to I mean, it's not. It's, I mean, it's in a way we went to Sir John Soane's house.
Oh yes, that's a brilliant museum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we went there last year because I did it for my Open University years ago, and I was always fascinated with this guy that had just collected all this stuff. I mean, sort of,
Mm,
and some of it's really random, and I think that randomness it makes it really exciting. To like, he had a real thing about Napoleon, so he's got like loads of pictures of Napoleon around, and it's just. And I think it's really interesting how the sort of the curators of the museum and things as well sort of look at that and are able to sort of bring that to life. And
mm.
yeah, that sounds good. I'm just looking at the time and we're nearly at the end. So Jody, do you have a go-to author? We talked about perfume, and so I don't know that that's your go-to, but do you have somebody that you go to when you have time? Because obviously you don't have a huge amount of time to read, but
I do read. No, I do. I read a lot actually. When I'm not writing, I'm reading. I read voraciously. So the Victorians, they're my happy place. When I'm really feeling like, I'm going to have a long bath and I'm going to have a treat, and it's going to be
yeah,
a book that I really love, it will be something by Charles Dickens or Thomas Hardy or Emile Zola or any of those big sort of baggy Victorian novels. I love them. Wilkie Collins. Um, or Victorian, anything Gothic. I'm very fond of Gothic. I like contemporary Gothic as well.
yeah.
There's a lot of writers like Diane Satterfield, Jess Kidd, Anna
Oh yeah, I
Mazzola,
love, yeah,
all writing really brilliant Gothic stories.
yeah.
One of my recent favourites was Anna Mazzola's The House of Whispers, which is fantastic. Um, I also really like Cormac McCarthy. He's very different to those kinds of writers, but I'm very
Yeah,
in
no, really
awe of his
different.
writing style. I think his poetry, his prose is so poetic and sparse and
Yeah.
wonderful that I could never write like that, and I admire his writing very much. So he's one of
Mm.
my favourites as well.
That's really, I mean, it's good, isn't it, to have like, because obviously you have a real love of the Victorian, but actually to have someone completely different as well, um,
Mm.
is really interesting. Do you have anything that you've sort of read recently that you would recommend to us? Do you get sort of proofs and things sent through other writers?
No, not too many. I think the book that I've read most recently that has really impressed me, and but it's not a crime novel, was Bernardine Evaristo's Mr. Loverman,
Oh yeah, yeah.
because have you read that? It
No,
is
I read
just the
her
most
the other one.
extraordinary character.
Yeah,
His characterization in that book is amazing because, of course, he's just absolute rogue that
yeah.
she's developed. In so many ways, a complete rogue and a complete maverick, and you just root for him, and you're almost cross with yourself while you're reading the book for rooting for him. But she's done something really clever with that. I really love that book.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm also reading a book at the moment, and quite dreadfully I can't remember the author's name, but it's initials. and it's called Bodies of Water. And it's about what the water treatment that Victorians used to give fallen women, sex workers. They used to get taken off to these big hospitals by the River Thames, and dunked in water. And it's a brilliant book. It's really, really gothic.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I mean, they sound amazing and horrific all at the same time, aren't they? Because these things sort of really happened, you know, like the electric shock treatments and all those sorts of things they did. You know, and for people who were nervous, you know, people who had anxiety, and to be honest, most of the anxiety was, you know, well founded. It wasn't like just you know, it was yeah. And I think that's something that really stuck with me in the book, is that actually when I was thinking back after I'd read it and I'd finished it, I was thinking, well, there's nothing, you know, what happens to Maddie? She doesn't do anything like really bad, does she? It's a drip, which, oopsie, my cat's now decided to come in. It's a real drip, isn't it? And you think, well, how does she end? I was thinking about halfway through the book, oh, how does she end up where she ends up? Because I couldn't see that coming, and I thought, well, there must be something really big going to happen that, you know, so that she ends up, you know, is sort of, you know, fighting for her life. But actually, I think that's the scariest thing, isn't it? Is that actually it's not that straightforward, really. It's not that simple.
No. And so, yeah, so it was, as I said, it was quite important for me to do that sort of slow drip, as well as, you know, having something in there so that, you know, readers of crime and gothic could understand something meaty was about to happen. That you need those breadcrumbs, don't you, to keep you reading. I saw a review that somebody had done of the book recently, and it said Jody Cooksley is the queen of sustained threat.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually,
which I absolutely love, and we'll be putting on some t-shirts.
Yeah, no, I like that. No, I think that's true. Yeah, I think there is, because actually from the outset, you are in for a ride. You know, you know, if it, you know, I would say it's not for the faint-hearted, but not in a bad way, but it is threatening. It is unsettling, but all in a really good way. I loved it. I thought it was great, and I can't wait for book 2.
Well, thank you.
So my book, so Helen, who does the publicity, she sent me 2 copies of this, and this one finally arrived this week. I think you've got the lovely pretty one. I've got the proof. Yes, it's a beautiful.
Yeah, you've got mine's kind of backwards on my screen.
Yeah. So I was really thrilled to get. I had it on NetGalley, but it is always nice to have a book to show. So yes, so it's out now, and yeah. So we hope everything goes well with the book, and look forward to book 2. And yeah, if you'd like to come on and chat to us about book 2 and more about, can't wait to read more about Maddie and see what happens to her in 8 years' time. That'll be fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute treat to just talk about books and writing for an hour.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.